Today we'll look at 2 tricks you can use to describe things or people in your writing. Turn your self-study kit to page 3 and let's start. There's a concept we have to understand before looking at the real tricks, and it has to do with the word literally. This is a word we say a lot, but are you using it right? When you say something is literal, you mean it is exactly as defined in the dictionary. If you say you're hungry, you are hungry. The opposite of what's literal would be figurative. Figures would be something like pictures, something that is created, even imagined. Any kind of language that is figurative means it is not exactly like it is defined in the dictionary, but with a created meaning that the speaker uses, just like how we would create artwork. I know theories can be boring, so here are 2 examples to help you understand. We have 2 sentences, each of them using a different expression in English, and both of them carry a literal and a figurative meaning. For the first one, if someone says he has lost his marbles, the literal meaning would be he owns some marbles and the marbles are falling away. He has lost them. But the figurative meaning, that is how this expression is used in context for a creative expression, losing one's marbles can mean going crazy. Probably because you lost something that you like, or things are simply not in order anymore. The other expression is, he put all his eggs in one basket. The literal meaning is, as you can see, really having eggs in one basket. The figurative meaning, that is how we use this expression to present something that is deeper and more than what we can see. Putting all of your eggs in one basket means taking a big risk. Imagine you have all these eggs that you can use, and you can choose to store them in different places so that they won't be so easily broken. Yet, if you keep them all in one basket, then if anything happens to these fragile eggs, they will just break and you will lose everything. Let's look at one more example. What does it mean when someone says that the test is a killer? If you take this literally, then the test paper is probably really going to kill you. For example, if it has any kind of poison on it, then when you are writing, it will go into your skin and you could really die. But most of the time when we say this, we are being figurative. It only means that the test was really hard, that you felt like you were about to die, and you're using a creative expression to show that feeling of yours. So although we sometimes say things like, I literally laughed my head off, we know that is not possible. When we say things like this, we are actually saying things that are literally figurative. The 2 tricks that we are going to look at are similes and metaphors. Both of them are creative expressions that allow you to use something that is more expressive, more imaginative, to represent an idea that you want to present. But these 2 come in a very different structure. First of all, for simile, you will be taking 2 things that are similar in a certain way. For example, if you say your friend is similar to a book, in a way that a book and your friend are both very clever, and both of them are waiting to be read, waiting to be understood. If you want to describe this, you can say a friend is like a book. You have to use the word like or as, so that people will know that you are comparing them in order to express something. When you use the word like or as to compare 2 things, you are using a simile. Then what about a metaphor? As we said, when we write poems, we like to leave room for interpretation for our readers. If we tell them, I'm comparing this, I'm comparing that with a simile all the time, it can get a little bit over-controlling, and it's not so fun for the readers. So sometimes we would use metaphors and let them figure out what is special in our expressions. Like in this example, love is a burning candle. It doesn't sound right at first, because we know love is a feeling, it's not a candle. But this kind of contrast will make the readers think, and they will try to figure out what is similar between these 2 things, and they will begin to understand what you're trying to express. The following lines actually give them a little bit more clues on what you're trying to say. Love is a burning candle because like a burning candle, it's not always easy to handle. And like a burning candle, love can burn, but it's still beautiful. And also both of them would make celebrations oh so meaningful. Now let's see if you can tell the difference between these two with some examples. Here are 4 examples, and I've highlighted the parts that are descriptions for you. You have to decide whether these are similes or metaphor. The major difference between these two is we always have to use the words like or as when we use a simile, but we don't have to when we write metaphors. You have 10 seconds to decide and put a tick in the corresponding boxes. Let's check the answers. As you can see, number 1 and number 4 are similes because number 1 uses the word like and number 4 uses the word as. Let's look at one poem to feel the effect of using similes and metaphors in a piece of writing. We'll first go through the whole poem to see what it means, and then look at the questions together. Like any other text, when we read a poem, we start with the title. And this title gives us a clear direction for imagination and interpretation. What comes to mind when you see the word seeds? Does it remind you of plant, growth, nurturing, or does it remind you of food ingredients like chia seeds? I would want to say that the first 3 possibilities are more likely, but with poems, we can be as creative as we want, and we really have to read on to find out. And as we read the first stanza, we see something that is not quite literal. The poem says, you drew pictures of life with your words. We can draw with pen, with ink, but we can't draw with words. So we know this expression is figurative. It is telling us something that is special. As we read on, we see 3 more examples of figurative language. The writer ate the words that you said. We can't eat words. The writer compared his growth to trees, and he said he became the words that he ate. So the writer uses words and trees to express what he's trying to tell us, but we don't know what that is yet. Let's take a look at the whole poem again. The poem says, you drew pictures of life with your words. I listened and ate these words you said to grow up strong. Like the trees, I grew. Branches, leaves, flowers, and then the fruit. Wait a minute, did you notice this is a list of words like the one with butterfly and bee that we've looked at? The line break here highlights the process of growth from a seed to the fruit of a tree. Then we know that this is something we have to pay attention to. As we read on, the second stanza says, I became the words I ate in you. For better or worse, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Like how we would write the conclusion at the end of an article, and how we keep the punchline at the end of a limerick. The last part of a poem usually brings out the message of the whole piece. In this case, the last line reads like a message. We would think, why the apple? Why not just any apple? And what does it mean for better or worse? To work out the message, we have to look at the whole poem for some keywords, such as the title of the poem is Seeds, but the content seems to be about a person's growth by listening to something that you said. How does listening to words make someone grow? The questions might help us figure this out, so let's take a look. Question 1a. In the poem, the narrator is speaking to you, who is the person that speaks words for the narrator to listen and grow. In this case, we don't have any clues saying that you is a person who draws pictures for a living. Although in the first 2 lines, the narrator says you drew pictures as a metaphor. So the answer is false. Question 1b. We just looked at the whole poem, and we know it's not about growing trees, but the growth of the narrator himself. Therefore, 1b is also false. Question 1c. Is the poet talking to his or her parents? This is a poem about growth and about listening to what someone said in order to grow. In this case, it's possible. It's not definite, but the statement says probably, so the answer is true. And question 1c actually gives us a clue for question 2. You in this poem may be parents, or just one parent, or more specifically, the writer's parents. Question 3. From what we've looked at in the poem, is it about growing up? Yes. Is it about the beauty of apple trees? Maybe not, but let's keep looking. Is it about parent and child? Probably. Is it about the power of words? The poem is about how words make people grow, so definitely yes. Therefore, question 3, the answer is B. The poem is not about the beauty of apple trees. It is just a metaphor that the writer uses to express the message. Question 4. Remember we were trying to figure out the message from the poem. Here are 4 options for us to choose. Is the last line of the poem about fallen apples? Maybe not. Is it about children growing up to be like their parents? Probably, because the poem can be about parent and child. But let's keep looking just to be sure. Is it about children being similar to apples? We have a number of similes and metaphors in the poems, but it's not about this. And is it about how apples will split open when they fall? Nothing like this is mentioned at all. Therefore, the answer for question 4 is B. Children grow up to be like their parents, just like how an apple would stay close to a tree. They will not be too far from each other, and they won't be too different. For questions 5 and 6, we can choose our answers from the 4 figurative use of language in the poem. Which of these could be a simile? We know a simile must have the words like or as. Therefore, the only possibility is like the trees I grew. Question 6, we are asked to find a metaphor which can be any of the remaining 3 examples, but we need this metaphor to describe the act of speaking. 2 of the remaining examples are about eating words, which is more similar to listening than speaking, which means we're left with the first example, that is, drawing pictures of life with words. To draw pictures of life, to create pictures with words, means speaking. So the answer is, you drew pictures of life with your words. Finally, for question 7, what do you think for better or worse means? We know the poem is about how children will grow up to be like their parents. But why for better or worse? What are the things that we learn from our parents that could be good or bad? There is no definite answer for this question because it is asking for your opinion. For an exam paper, you'll have to find clues in the text to support your answers, but this exercise is for understanding and appreciating poems, and I would much rather you take this opportunity to realize that it is entirely your freedom to decide what you get out of a poem. That's why we have to leave room for interpretation when writing poems, sometimes by using similes and metaphors to include a greater variety of things and ideas in the poems for the readers to explore. This is the end of session 2. Please complete session 3 on your own as a comprehension practice, and we'll talk about the answers for that, as well as your ideas for writing, when we meet.